Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed international calls for a halt to the fighting, while UN and other aid officials have warned a public health catastrophe is engulfing citizens in Gaza, with hospitals struggling to cope with mounting casualties, compounded by shortages of food, medicine, water and fuel. Just over 3 weeks ago, violence erupted after Hamas fighters launched a deadly attack into southern Israel. For more on this, let's take you live now to the US, and SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease is live for us in New York. Sherwin, good evening to you and welcome. What is the latest on these airstrikes?
Well, we're waiting to get reaction from the United Nations spokesperson, Iman. He's due to do his briefing any minute now. This news, of course, just breaking around the world. But I think, it comes in a broader context. We have seen over 8,000 deaths in the Gazan enclave, in addition to the 1,400 Israelis that were killed by that Hamas attack on October 7th. And the death toll has just continued to expand, to rise in the aftermath of Israel's intensification of its bombardment over the last few days. You saw the blackout over the weekend. We heard from Philippe Lazzarini, the Commissioner General of the UN Relief and Works Agency, essentially the largest humanitarian operation in Gaza, basically appealing again to the UN Security Council last night for a ceasefire. He talked about how basic services were crumbling, medicine is running out, food and water running out, fuel running out, and Gazans don't feel that they are being seen, Iman, as regular citizens of the world. They feel that they are being treated very differently here due to the intransigence of the United Nations Security Council that has been unable to pass a resolution, a legally binding resolution that would demand or call for a humanitarian ceasefire or a humanitarian pause. We saw some action from the UN General Assembly on Friday calling for an immediate humanitarian pause, a humanitarian ceasefire, but of course General Assembly resolutions are non-binding, and so they are just willfully ignored. It also makes the case about Security Council resolutions, which are binding, Iman, but two have been ignored by countries including Israel. So it's unclear even, if the passage of a Security Council resolution here will be able to change the calculus on the ground in any fundamental way. One gets a sense that solutions are going to be found elsewhere. We also heard from US Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield yesterday, and she made the point, Iman, speaking to the context we're talking about now in terms of this airstrike. President Biden spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu and reiterated that while Israel has the right and responsibility to defend its citizens from terrorism, it must do so in a manner that is consistent with international humanitarian law. The fact that Hamas operates within and under the cover of civilian areas creates an added burden for Israel, but it does not lessen its responsibility to distinguish between terrorists and innocent civilians. And just that quote, I think, speaks to what we are seeing playing itself out in that refugee camp in Gaza at this time. 50 dead, over 150 injured, and it really speaks to Israel's obligations in terms of, even in wartime, upholding its responsibilities in terms of international humanitarian law, Iman.
Well, Sherwin, you've encapsulated what's been happening at the UN. You've shared with us what we do know at this point around this particular tragic and bloody development. Barring what we've heard so far and the activity in the UN, specifically in the UNSC, who else is lobbying for the plight of Palestinians, and also what more do we know about the Jabalia refugee camp? We may not have that information to hand straight away because we are news gathering on these items as we speak, but maybe we just go then to the question of who is lobbying if no one in the UNSC ultimately is listening.
Well, let's look back at what has happened in the Council. There have been 4 resolutions. 2 didn't pass because they lacked the requisite 9 votes required for passage. You then had another resolution put forward by Brazil that had 12 countries in favor of humanitarian pauses, but it was vetoed by the United States with 2 abstentions. You then had China and Russia, veto the United States text calling for humanitarian pauses. So there are, there's this conflagration in a way of different views about how to arrest the situation. The United States believes that diplomacy should be given time on the ground, diplomacy that is being pushed by Washington and the Qataris in terms of possible prisoner hostage exchanges. and that's why I often say that, while people are looking for solutions here at the United Nations, you're asking me who's lobbying here. Despite, the divisions on who's lobbying for what, solutions are often not going to be found at the United Nations Security Council because of these backroom negotiations that have so far delivered 4 freed hostages, right? That didn't come from a Security Council decree. It came from backroom maneuvering, diplomatic maneuvering that is being led by Washington, by the Qataris, and engaging with Israel and Egypt. So, this notion that solutions might come out of New York seems a bit far-fetched given the intransigence we have seen play itself out since this conflict erupted on October 7th.
We'll definitely talk more about this. Thank you for the update. SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, live for us from New York.